You know, what's interesting about being the quiet one in the room? People see you sitting there, not making noise, not demanding attention, not fighting for your place in the conversation. And they make a decision about you, a fast one. They decide you're gentle. They decide you're easy. They decide you're the kind of person who can be moved, managed, figured out. And for a long time, you didn't correct them, not because you couldn't, but because that's not who you are. You were never trying to win a room. You were never trying to make people feel small so you could feel big. You were just trying to be good. You were just trying to show up with kindness and keep things peaceful and not make everything harder than it already was. And somehow, that became the thing they used against you. So before I go any further, I need you to know something. This message is not for everyone. I mean that. This is for the specific person who was written off, who got labeled too sensitive, too soft, too easy to read. The person someone looked at and thought, I've got this one figured out. Because something happened, something shifted, and it didn't happen loudly. It didn't happen in a moment anyone around you probably noticed. But it happened. Something in you changed. Something settled. Something that used to bend stopped bending. And the people who thought they had you completely figured out, they are realizing right now that they never knew you at all. What's going on in their world because of that realization? That's exactly what I want to sit with you and talk about today. They built a whole story about you, not based on anything real, not based on who you actually are or what you're actually made of, based on what was convenient for them, based on what made it easier for them to treat you the way they wanted to treat you. They saw your gentleness and they ran with it. They saw the way you didn't raise your voice, the way you didn't make scenes, the way you could sit in a room full of tension and still choose to be kind. And instead of respecting that, they filed it away. They categorized it. They made a decision about you that had nothing to do with your actual strength and everything to do with what they needed you to be. They decided you were easy. They decided you were predictable, that they could push in a certain direction and you would go there, that they could take a little more than they gave and you would adjust, that they could test the edges of your patience and you would hold, not because you were strong, but because you were too soft to do anything else. That's what they told themselves. That's the story they built. And here is the part that might be hard to hear for a second. For a while, they weren't entirely wrong about the outcome, even if they were completely wrong about the reason, because maybe you did move, maybe you did adjust, you made yourself a little smaller in certain rooms, you softened your voice when part of you wanted to be louder, you gave energy you didn't have left to give because you didn't want to be the person who makes things difficult. You picked up the slack. You stayed quiet when you had every right to speak. You absorbed things that were never yours to carry. And they watched all of that and they thought they understood you completely. This person will always do that. This person will always find a way to accommodate. This person is safe to underestimate because they never actually push back. That became the version of you they decided on. The one they introduced to other people. The one they referenced in conversations you weren't in. The one they counted on staying exactly the same so they never had to change anything about how they showed up. But here is what they did not understand. What they were looking at was not weakness. What they were calling softness, the universe calls something else entirely, because patience under pressure is not something most people can sustain. Choosing kindness when someone is being unkind, back. That is not the path of least resistance. That is one of the hardest things a person can do consistently. staying gentle when the world keeps giving you reasons not to be. That does not happen by accident. That is something that gets built slowly, quietly, and in specific people, through specific experiences, for a reason that doesn't always make sense in the middle of it but becomes undeniable on the other side of it. The universe does not waste that kind of construction. The people who come through fire and somehow don't harden, they are not naive. They are not weak. They are not easy. They are carrying something that most people spend their whole lives trying to find and never do, a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, a kind of depth that doesn't need to perform. They had you right in front of them the whole time, and they completely mistook what they were looking at. There was a moment, and I think if you're honest with yourself right now, you know exactly what moment I'm talking about. You don't need me to describe it in detail because you lived it. You felt it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't some big dramatic scene where you flipped a table or said everything you'd been holding back for years. It wasn't like that at all. It was quiet, almost uncomfortably quiet. Something inside you just stopped, like a door closing gently. No slam, no announcement, just a soft, final click. And in that quiet something became very, very clear to you. And you stopped performing. I mean that in the most specific way possible. You stopped performing gentleness for people who were studying your gentleness to find the edges of it. You stopped making yourself available at all hours for people who only remembered you, existed when they needed something from you. You stopped sending the long explanations, the context, and the apologies for things that weren't even your fault to people who had already decided what they believed about you and weren't going to change their minds no matter what you said. You just stopped. And it didn't feel like giving up. It felt like something closer to coming home. And that's when it started. That's when the frequency around you began to shift in a way that's hard to put into words, but you felt it in your body. Because here is something that doesn't get talked about enough. When you stop pouring your energy into spaces that were never built to hold you, something opens. Something that was blocked starts moving. Something higher, something that had been waiting on you to stop shrinking yourself. It starts working on your behalf in ways you can't always see, but you can absolutely feel. People started noticing something different about you. Not your clothes, not your circumstances, something underneath all of that, something in the way you carried yourself, something in the way you stopped rushing to fill silences that weren't yours to fill, something in the way you looked at people who used to make you nervous and felt nothing but calm. You didn't change who you are. Let me be clear about that. The kindness is still there. The warmth is still there. But you stopped hiding how much of you there actually is. And that combination, a quiet strength that used to be invisible, suddenly wasn't invisible anymore. And the people who thought they had you figured out, they felt it, they couldn't name it. They probably couldn't even explain to themselves why they suddenly felt unsettled when they thought about you. But something in them registered the shift. The person they had mentally filed away as predictable was no longer predictable. The person they thought would always soften when pushed wasn't softening anymore. The person they assumed would pick up on the second ring stopped picking up. And that silence coming from you now, that new silence that was not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, that was the silence of someone who finally understood that not every space deserves their voice. That kind of silence does something to people who counted on your noise to feel powerful. It breaks something open in them. something they were not prepared for, something they don't have the tools to deal with, because they built their whole understanding of the dynamic on a version of you that no longer exists. And now they have to figure out what to do with that. While they were still telling the story of the old you, you were already gone, not gone like you disappeared, not gone like you got hard or cold or bitter, gone like you outgrew the version of yourself that used to wait for their approval. And the thing is, you didn't announce it, you didn't make a post about it, you didn't sit them down and explain what was happening inside you. You just quietly became someone they no longer had a map for, because that's how real change works. It doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in 100 small moments that nobody claps for. The morning you woke up and decided not to send that text. The conversation you walked away from because you recognized it was designed to drain you. The invitation you turned down because something in you knew that room wasn't for you anymore. None of those moments felt like transformation when they were happening. They just felt like choices. Small, quiet, personal choices. But here is what I need you to understand about those choices. Every single time you chose not to react, you were building something. Every time you felt the pull to defend yourself and you didn't, you were building something. Every time you swallowed the argument that wasn't worth your energy, every time you chose your peace over the temporary satisfaction of being right, something was being constructed inside you, quietly, solidly, without anyone watching. You were building an interior life, a foundation, something so deep and so grounded that by the time anyone around you even noticed you had changed, it was already finished, already complete. And now when they come with their words, with their opinions, with their attempts to rattle you the way they used to, they hit something they weren't expecting. They hit something that doesn't move anymore, and they don't know what to do with that. Because the person they practiced their tactics on, that person is not here anymore. And now I want to talk about the thing they mocked you for. That gentleness, that sensitivity, that softness they called weakness, that openness they called naivety, that warmth they decided meant you were easy, the very thing they used to dismiss you, that is the exact thing that is drawing people to you now. The right people. People who recognize something rare when they're standing in front of it. Because here is what most people never figure out. Gentleness that has been through fire is not the same as gentleness that has never been tested. There is a difference, and you can feel it when you're near it. You carry a warmth now that isn't naive. It's been through something. It knows what cruelty looks like, and it chose to stay warm anyway. That's not weakness. That is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Your kindness has boundaries now. Your softness knows its own worth, and that combination, something that is open but not reckless, warm but not desperate, gentle but completely unafraid. There is nothing more magnetic than that in this world, and they are feeling that pull. The people who wrote you off, the people who called you too much, the people who looked at your gentleness and decided it was something they could use, they are feeling something they cannot name right now. A kind of loss, a kind of recognition that arrives too late. They are realizing what they were standing next to, and they are realizing they let it go. So I need to prepare you for something, because it's either already happening or it's about to, and I want you to be ready for it before it catches you off guard. The people who underestimated you, they are going to start showing up again. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not in the way you imagined. It's not going to be some big dramatic moment where they come to your door and say everything you deserved to hear years ago. That's not how this works. And what it actually looks like is quieter than that. A text out of nowhere, something casual, something small, like they're just checking in, a comment on something you posted, something that didn't need a response, but they gave one. Anyway, a mutual friend suddenly bringing up your name in a conversation that had nothing to do with you. They are circling, and I need you to understand what that circling actually means. It means something in them is registering what they lost. Not just who you were, but what you represented. The consistency, the warmth, the way you showed up even when you didn't have to. They treated that like it was ordinary. They treated you like you were something they could set down and pick back up whenever it was convenient. And now they are reaching for you and realizing you are not where they left you. And that is doing something to them they were not prepared for. Now here's the part I really need you to hear, because this is where a lot of people make the mistake. Your softness is not the problem. Your openness is not the problem. Don't let what happened to you turn you into someone who closes off completely, who builds walls so thick that nothing good can get through either. That is not the answer. That is not what all of this was building toward. But you have something now that you didn't have before, and it is one of the most valuable things a person can carry. Discernment. You can feel the difference now. You can feel it in your body before your mind even catches up. The difference between someone reaching out because they genuinely see you and someone reaching out because they need something, because they're lonely, because things didn't work out the way they planned after they let you go, because they finally looked around and noticed the space your absence created. Trust that feeling. I mean, really trust it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't let their words override what your gut already knows. That feeling is not paranoia. That is not you being bitter or closed off or unforgiving. That is something higher protecting what it spent a very long time building in you. That is your spirit knowing the difference between someone who is ready to honor you and someone who just wants access to you again. And those are not the same thing. Because here is what I know about people like you. The ones who stayed soft through seasons that should have made them hard. The ones who kept choosing kindness even when it cost them something real. The ones who kept showing up with grace even when nobody was clapping for it, even when nobody was even watching. Those people are not accidents. That is not a personality quirk. That is not just how you were raised or something random about your temperament. Something higher knew exactly what it was doing when it built you this way. Every moment of patience that felt like weakness was training. Every time you held your peace when you had every reason to fall apart was preparation. Every soft response you gave when a hard one would have been so much easier was formation. You were never the easy one. You were the strong one. You were always the strong one. You were just strong in a way they didn't have a word for, and some of them are only now beginning to understand what they were actually standing in front of this whole time. And I think on some level, you always knew, not in a way you could explain to someone else, not in a way that would have made sense if you tried to say it out loud, but somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the patience and the quietness and the giving and the holding on, you knew that what you were carrying was not ordinary. You knew that the way you moved through the world meant something. The gentleness that stayed even when people didn't deserve it. The patience that held even when everything in you wanted to break. The decision over and over again to not become bitter even though you had every reason to. That wasn't just your personality. That wasn't just the way you were born. That was a mission. something higher to place that in you on purpose, something that knew exactly what it was doing when it built you the way it built you. And you carried it even before you understood what it was for. You're starting to understand now, and I want to say something to you directly. I need you to really hear this. You did nothing wrong. You did nothing wrong by being who you are. You did nothing wrong by being kind in rooms that didn't deserve your kindness. You did nothing wrong by staying longer than you should have, by hoping people would rise to meet you, by believing the best about someone who is showing you something different. That is not weakness. That is not a mistake. That is a form of love. And love is never wasted, even when it lands on the wrong people. Even when it goes unappreciated, even when it gets taken advantage of, it still does something. It shaped you, it refined you. Every single moment of it was turning you into exactly the person you needed to become. So don't you dare be ashamed of any of it. Not one moment, not one time you chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. That was never a flaw. That was always the point. And here is what I really need you to sit with. The people who are showing back up right now, the ones reaching out, the ones circling, the ones suddenly remembering you exist, they are not coming back for the old you. The version of you that stayed quiet and stayed small and stayed available no matter how they treated you. That's not what they're chasing. They're coming back because of who you are now. The version of you that knows its own worth. The version of you that stopped explaining itself. The version of you that became completely, quietly, undeniably sure of itself. And that version of you was built in the exact moments they tried to break you. Every dismissal built something. Every eye roll built something. Every time someone called you too much or told you that you were too sensitive or made you feel like the way you loved was somehow a problem. It was building this. It was building you. They thought they were diminishing you. They were actually just finishing you, completing you, pressing you into something solid. So wherever you are right now, whatever room you're sitting in, whatever you're carrying today, whatever chapter you're in the middle of, I need you to know that you are not the easy one. You never were. You were the rare one. And the right people in your life, they feel that now. They know even the wrong ones are starting to understand what I am so proud of you, not for what you've accomplished, not for how far you've come, but for who you refuse to stop being through all of it. I love you. I really, truly do.